Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. Let's turn to comments that Donald Trump made in an interview, starting out saying he'd be willing to take what he called a competency test, which I think is a cognitive test in essence. Let's listen to Trump talk about it.
Should there be an age limit to running for president?
No, but there should be a competency. I'm all for the test. You know, I took a test 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and as the doctors said, and it was in front of doctors and a whole big deal at Walter Reed, which is an incredible place, and I aced it. I got everything right. I'm all for testing. I frankly think testing would be a good thing. A lot of people say it's not constitutional to do it, but I would be for testing to make sure everyone's just fine. But a lot of people say that can't happen because of Constitution.
Kim, a lot of people say, a famous, familiar. Yep, got everything right. Well, I think we should give Donald Trump maybe that Wonderlic test that NFL players have to take. It'd be fun. Anyway, on a more serious note, is this idea of a competency test or a cognitive test a good idea? Presidential candidates, Nikki Haley's been pressing it, obviously, on the stump for the reason that she wants to make the age issue front and center in the campaign.
Well, look, we're having this national discussion about the age of candidates, and why wouldn't we be? I mean, you watch Joe Biden for 5 minutes on the television, and it is alarming at times. I am actually with Donald Trump. I wonder if there is a constitutional bar to engaging such a thing, but that's a very different question than whether or not presidents or presidential candidates, I should say, would be willing to submit to such and release them to the public as a way, a kind of good housekeeping seal of approval. They do that right now with ongoing sort of medical reports. None of that is required, obviously, to run for the presidency, but they do it to reassure the public that they are fit and ready to take on the challenges of one of the more demanding jobs in the world. You know, it's a transparency question, much as we at the editorial page support the idea and the practice of presidential candidates putting out their tax information. Donald Trump hasn't done that, but we like that idea. So I don't have an issue with people personally adopting this. I think it would be impossible to impose it, but I do think it's an increasingly hot and important topic if we are going to have people who are routinely seeking the highest office in their 70s and their 80s.
The constitutional question, I think, is fairly straightforward. How there are only certain specifications for qualifications, if you will, for running for president. One, you have to be at least 35. Two, you have to have been 14 years a resident of the U.S. and be a U.S. citizen. There's very few others. I just looked at it before we came up here. So you don't have to release your tax returns. You don't have to have a competency test. You don't even have to have a medical test. And the Constitution is not going to be amended to do these things. So none of this would be mandated or required of any candidate. The question is, does it become a custom? Does it become something that voters expect, which until Donald Trump ran, they expected for many years of a candidate running for president to release his tax records. That's changed now, and it didn't seem to hurt Donald Trump. So the idea of a competency test, Trump obviously is attempting to contrast his own abilities with Joe Biden's, but I can't see Joe Biden agreeing to anything like that.
That's the problem here is the politicians, if it's not required, are going to do whatever is in their best interest at any given moment. I agree with you that it probably can't be required absent a constitutional amendment. There was a case in the 1990s, I think, about term limits that states had put on Congress, and the Supreme Court struck that down and essentially said that the constitutional requirements to hold these federal offices are in the Constitution, and you can't add anything to them. And that's why this debate is kind of gimmicky to my mind. And the politicians that are proposing it, including Nikki Haley, are a little bit slippery about it because sometimes they're suggesting that this would be a mandatory requirement, anybody who's over the age of 75. So here's an op-ed she wrote a few months ago. This is not a qualification for office. Failing a mental competency test would not result in removal. It's about transparency. So it's not clear what this even means as a real actual policy proposal. As far as candidates doing it voluntarily, I mean, they're always free to do that. And maybe some of them will. Maybe Trump will again. But I also think it's important to think about and remember the really low bar that this sets. So one of these tests that Trump took, Trump said he was first asked to repeat a set of words, person, woman, man, camera, TV, he said, offering a hypothetical example. And then later in the assessment, after some time had elapsed, he was again asked whether he remembered those same words. And then here's Trump. And they said, go back to that question and repeat them. Can you do it? And you go, person, woman, man, camera, TV. They say, that's amazing. How did you do that? And so I am a little perplexed that he keeps bragging about how he aced this test. Another one of the portions in some of the example tests is like identifying animals that are drawn on the piece of paper. I mean, is this really where we are? I suspect that even President Biden could probably identify some drawings of animals.
Well, some of these are competency tests for people who are suspected of having dementia, right? I mean, they're supposed to be that simple. What testing short-term memory and so on. This mental health, mental competency question, Kim, is a version of what we do with physical health, right? What are your candidates? And once they're in office, presidents, they issue annual results from their physician, and they say they're fit as a fiddle, might have a little acid reflux, slow walk with a slow gait. But boy, really up to doing every bit of the job. And you don't know how much to believe. And of course, we have a history in this country of people lying like crazy, presidents about their and candidates about their physical condition. I mean, FDR hid the fact that he was in decline in 1944. You had Wilson in his second term was essentially disabled, and many people think Edith Wilson ran the country.
Fair enough.
For the most part. Probably wasn't any worse than the President Wilson. But JFK, of course, had Addison's disease, hid that, took steroids, hid that. You know, so people just aren't, they're going to lie, and that's unfortunate. But I think in the case of this, my own view is that these competency tests might end up obfuscating more than they actually reveal. And in the sense, I don't think we need one. I mean, I think you can tell.
Right.
The voters get it. They look at President Biden, for example, and they say, he is declining. I can see it. I don't need anybody to tell me he got 6 questions out of 10 correct. He's got a problem. And I think that's influencing their polling data that says they think he's too old to run. And that's what that's a proxy for. So the voters get it. Now, whether the elite politicians are still going to ignore all that may be the case. But I think if, as you're a voter, you look at President Biden, and for that matter, you know, Trump is old too, and he could decline rapidly because we know that can happen at any age. So, but you look at President Biden and you say, I guess I have to think about who's the vice president on this ticket.
By the way, you know who else gets it? Donald Trump gets it, and Nikki Haley gets it, which is the sort of joke of all of this. Everybody understands that these doctors' assessments come out. I mean, to listen to the ones that have come out about Joe Biden, you would think that the man was ready and able to not just go and compete in, but win an ultramarathon tomorrow if you were to listen to his doctor's reports, which everyone can know just from looking at him. That's not the case, okay? He's an 80-year-old man. But this has now become the kind of deal, as it were, that physicians put out these glowing statements of health. Nobody believes them. The same would go with a mental competency test. It is unbelievable. You couldn't even imagine any White House ever allowing a physician to put out the results of a mental competency test that said that the candidate or the president wasn't fully competent and it wasn't amazing. Donald Trump and Nikki Haley knows that the president is never going to agree to do this, that these are not likely to become routine, and that they're not likely to have much value even if they were something that was put out there. The reason that you do this is purely politics, because it is an additional way of highlighting Biden's age and suggesting that he's hiding something by the fact that he will refuse to go down this road. And by themselves stepping up to say, see, we do it, we're good. It's just a contrast and a suggestion that this is a deep problem. Again, I don't think that necessarily needs any more highlighting. It's pretty obvious to people out there, but it's going to be their way of really leading on this issue and making that case against a Biden reelection.
All right, let's turn to final issue today, which is Donald Trump's comments on abortion on the weekend. Let's listen to what he had to say. Again, this is on Meet the Press.
People are starting to think of 15 weeks. That seems to be a number that people are talking about right now.
Would you sign that?
I would sit down with both sides and I'd negotiate something. and we'll end up with peace on that issue for the first time in 52 years. I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't. I mean, DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that
I
goes
think what
too
he
far?
did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake. But we'll come up with a number. But at the same time, Democrats won't be able to go out in 6 months, 7 months, 8 months and allow an abortion.
Well, we'll come up with a number, Kyle, and we'll have peace in our time on abortion. A former president, never shy about his capacities for negotiating peace domestically. I guess it's like ending the Ukraine war in a day. But what about his opposition to the 6-week ban and quasi sort of saying, well, maybe 15?
Well, it's an interesting strategy for the president, in part because it may cost him some pro-life support in the Republican primary, but he's winning the Republican primary at this point by 40 points in the polling. On the other hand, saying that 6 weeks is too far and maybe 15 is what the nation needs, or maybe he'll come think about it and get together with both sides and come up with a number that is a little bit further out than 6 weeks, it may be a more popular message for Republicans in the general election. And so I don't know if he is strategizing about it that closely, because this does seem to fit his instincts. But it is fascinating the way that he's approached the abortion issue. He blamed many of the Republicans' losses in 2022 on that, when I think the evidence shows, I mean, there was some extra engagement from Democratic voters because of the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade, but many of those Republicans lost because they were bad candidates who were chosen and backed by President Trump. So I don't know. Like I said, this may cost him some support in the Republican primary, but maybe not enough to matter since he's so far ahead.
Well, that's, I think, the interesting thing to me here, Kim, is that he is so far ahead in the primaries, he's already thinking about the general election, right? He's already trying to triangulate this issue on abortion, which he views as, he has said many times, he thinks that is a vulnerability for Republicans now that Roe v. Wade is overturned. And I think that he doesn't think it's going to hurt him in the primaries. He doesn't think it's going to hurt him with DeSantis, who's got his signature on the 6-week Florida bill. Mike Pence, of course, making an issue of abortion in Iowa. I don't think Trump fears him. Tim Scott is another one who could try to use this. If there's going to be any vulnerability, it will be in Iowa, which has a strong evangelical base there in the GOP. But it's interesting. Trump doesn't seem to think so, which says a lot about how he views the competition.
Well, absolutely. He also, by the way, he did leave himself open kind of in a very big way there. He didn't really pin himself down on anything other than to be somewhat critical of Ron DeSantis, also Mike Pence on this issue during that interview. Look, I mean, if you're looking at a general election, a lot of what he said was right. He took victory for returning this issue to the states because of the new makeup of the Supreme Court under his picks. He said very clearly during that interview, abortion is a problem for the GOP. One of the other quotes he had was, Republicans speak very inarticulately about this, and we're not going to win on this issue. Which was just a mesmerizing comment coming them 40 minutes into that interview, which there was a lot of inarticulation going on there too. But where he left himself open, he did not necessarily commit himself to whether or not this should happen at a state level or a national level. He said, oh, when we get there, we'll get there. He also, I thought it was interesting, he sort of framed it almost in the way that Republicans used to talk about this issue. He seemed to be working his way talking about a late term abortion ban, but perhaps one where the number was lower than has been the case in the past at a federal level. So sort of flipping it back on its head, not talking about how long are we going to allow you to do this, but what is the point at which the nation rejects that process to be done anymore on grounds of morality. It's something that we can all circle around. And, he did very much, he sounded a little bit more like Nikki Haley in this way, and we have to find the things that we agree on. I'm not sure how that hurts or helps them in the primary, but it definitely radiates that he is not necessarily concerned about it, especially not even in that crucial state of Iowa, where that issue is going to resonate more than pretty much anywhere else.
Yeah, I would just say that, and the idea that you're going to sit down and negotiate some kind of agreement over a 15-week ban or a 20-week ban or a 30-week ban or a 40-week ban is just not going to happen. Well, maybe 40-week is past gestation. But the point is that no national ban is going to pass Congress. It will never get through a Democratic Senate. So unless you have 60 Republican votes, it's just not going to happen. So that we're just going to doomed, I think, for quite some time to have a debate on this before it ever shakes out and we see who gets the advantage in which states or nationally. All right. We'll leave it there. Kyle Peterson, thank you. Kim Strassel, thank you. Thank you all for listening. We're back every day for Potomac Watch. Thank you for listening. We hope to catch you tomorrow.